up? Hello, everybody, one and all. Welcome to another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy, because today we are talking about Monstress. We are continuing our read of Monstress by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda, and we are entering Volume 2 today.
The Blood. That's what it's called, Charles. I don't know if they show that in that fancy book of yours.
They do not show it in the Book 1 compendium here. They just show each issue as a chapter, so I don't get the volume titles. But yes, we are on Volume 2, which is issues 12 to 18. And they're...
Nope.
Yep. So, what?
I don't think so. It's 7... issues.
7 to 18.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, that chapter 7 to 12. Maybe I'm wrong, but...
yeah, it's 7 through 12. No, you're right. I just
different.
got the numbers. I did the math wrong. I forgot to count the number itself.
Oh, gotcha.
So we had read 6 last time, so we're on 7, and we read through 12. That's why you're here. That's why we make such a great team. So yeah, there's going to be spoilers.
We will be having spoilers up through Volume 2 of Monstress. So if you haven't read Volume 1 Volume 1 and Volume 2. I don't know why you'd just read Volume 2. If you haven't read Volume 1 and Volume 2, or up to Chapter 12 of Monstress, then now's a good time to turn this down in your headphones and, get to reading, because those are 2 awesome volumes of a great comic series that we highly recommend. Oh, and before we get into this, I want to give a shout out to Beth Tabler for turning us on to this awesome comic series. That's at Beth Tabler on Twitter, so give her a follow if you haven't already.
So, how would you like to start this conversation, Dylan? There's so much that is happening and is going on in this wide, wide world.
There's a lot going on, and I think this time the thing that I most homed in on as to what this volume seems to be focused on more than anything is Micah kind of living in the shadow of her relationship with her mother and enacting the ways that her mother has impacted her on the world. And I think also it's really interesting to look at the parallels in this volume between how Micah was treated by her mother and how Micah treats Kippa, otherwise known as Little Fox, and trying to tease apart what things has Micah sort of learned about being a role model from her mother, and how's that change how she expresses herself.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, because what we brought in with Volume 2, we got we got a lot of new characters, and we got to see more of the mother in this chapter. We got to see a few questions answered and a lot more questions asked. But one of the things that was interesting was we got to see these flashbacks of Micah with her mom, and how her mom kind of had a bit of a harsh hand with her and raising her. And, there's all kinds of reveals of, like, why Micah's mother decided to have Micah in the first place, and then being brought up as, like, oh, she needs to be hard, she needs to be ready for anything, because she's going to change the world. And then now Micah sees this, like, personified innocence, basically, in Little Fox, and how she chooses to, when she chooses to be strict, when she chooses to be more sensitive, or oftentimes aloof. It's interesting how those two play off of each other.
For sure. Well, we basically start, besides a little scene in the beginning of Micah eating sheep organs, we do start with Micah in her mother's base, putting on her mother's clothes,
Yeah.
and sorting through her mother's stuff with Little Fox right there. And one of the first interactions that happens in this volume is that Micah has been trying to get Little Fox to find something important that she knows is in the base, and Little Fox has a great sense of smell, as we've learned. And then when Kippa, which is Little Fox's actual name, when Kippa is unable to find anything, Micah basically says, I'm going to lock you in this room and only come back once you find something.
She
And all
said
of a
she'll be back
sudden,
in a couple days.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, back in a couple days. And she says, Miss, come back. Don't leave me. And Micah says, only if you found something. And she's got a pretty stern look on her face in this panel, Charles. And
Yes.
all of a sudden, Kippa does find something. And it's this sort of pressure makes diamonds moment for
Right.
Kippa. And we get a few of those where Micah is willing to be a little harsh. She's not gone to the levels of where her mother has went with her.
Right.
Like we find out her mother is physically abusive to
Yes.
Micah.
She
Yeah.
strangled Micah to try and get her fighting instincts to kick in or something like that. She like Micah's just like, oh, I'll leave you here for a few days. But then the mom was like, had her in like a chokehold, So there's that very distinct difference there. And I think what's interesting is one, yes, Micah's trying to, she had learned things from her mother, and she's trying to find out like how does she deal now that she's in the mom situation with Little Fox. But then there's also just the brutal necessity that this world demands. Like, she needs this key. She's being chased by dangerous people. And I think this whole volume walks that fine line between like, am I doing what my mother's always wanted me to? Am I acting like her? Have I inherited these things that I don't like about my mother? And then there's like things I have to get done, things that, people need to die, or we need to do this quickly, or, you need to come with me, or things like that. And she's always kind of walking that line, and she's trying to find herself in the middle of all of that. And that is a large part of what this volume's about. So she does need that key. It's urgent. So, I mean, she didn't put Little Fox in a chokehold, but she did put the pressure on it, and that is in part
Yeah,
from just the pressures that this world has put on her.
for sure. And what's really interesting about Monstress, we talked so much in our first episode about its balance,
Yeah.
its willingness to have a more grimdark, cynical approach, especially with the world at times, but also its willingness to be uncynical about things like hope and heroic
And
characteristics.
trust and love.
And exactly. And a thing that I was noting a lot in this read through is a lot of times those harsher moments, though the authors, I guess author and illustrator, do not seem to be expressing those as if they are things to approve of. Like they are very harsh and they are abuse and they're depicted that way when they are abuse, that is. And then they're also effective at times. And I think you have these moments like the end of the battle with Rohar, which is the ancient fox that they run into at the
Yep.
end of this volume.
Yep.
It basically ends with what I take to be a callback to when Micah was being choked by her mother with the scarf, where she's like, basically her mother was trying to teach her everything you could use as a weapon, and Micah didn't think of the scarf.
Right. Yes, that
And
was it. Yeah, that was what I was referring
I
to
think it was a
earlier.
scarf. But
That
anyway,
sounds right.
some
Yeah.
linen type thing. And her mother chokes her with it. And then later on, to finish this big epic fight at the end of the volume, Micah thinks to choke out Rohar with Rohar's chain.
Yeah.
And there's So it's a very eventually the chain breaks, which is kind of a cool moment too, right? It's like the prophecy that
Yeah,
you'd break his chains
yeah,
is fulfilled, but also it's fulfilled in the process of killing him.
yeah,
And at the same time, then Zin, the monster, helps finish the job, but she does choke him out, and it's yeah, it's strange because these harsher moments, though they're kind of depicted as messed up, they're also depicted as things that end up making the recipient of it stronger in some ways, or at least more equipped to handle how messed up the world is.
yeah. And I mean, that's some of the also just a little sidetrack here. That moment with when she's fighting that Fox character is some of the best illustrations in this volume. If you ask me, just super cool how his whole style changed. It's very dramatic. It's very demon-esque. Lots of really fun colors. That Fox character was just so much fun to look at. And
Yeah,
he was also playing with her mind in those moments too. He was like causing her to think, to like hallucinate almost. And it's like, oh, that's not real. You're still you. You've always been you. And that comes down to what we're talking about of like, who is she and what's true and all of that, and her struggling to figure that out while also literally trying to fight the hallucinations from this like uh, sorceress Fox character. Was very interesting, and that's kind of the rising action that leads to um, Micah, you know, thinking of her mother and strangling him with the chains. It's very
yeah,
wild. It's very interesting.
yeah. Definitely wild and interesting. And I think we'll have a lot more to say about Rohar. I have that as one of our discussion points to get to, is just talking about that fight and all that. Because this is, I'm a couple volumes ahead of us, Charles,
Yeah.
and I'll say to this point that whole thing that plays out on the Isle of Bones, especially the fight with Rohar, is one of the most memorable and one of my favorite moments in this entire series. So I
Right.
want to get into that more, but I
Well,
do
let's
want
do
to
it.
hear about the. Yeah, I mean, I do want to flesh out these parallels between Micah and Little Fox and Micah's mother a little bit more, because
Mm-hmm.
I think I guess I want to get at that theme of like, what do the authors seem to be depicting in these moments where you have like Micah letting Little Fox almost drown because she knows that she's gonna be able to swim in that moment, and some of those moments where she does put the pressure on Little Fox. Like, what were your reactions to that?
You know, Little Fox has always been such an interesting standout character for this, and
Yes.
those moments where they're on the ship, I do think at this point Micah has definitely taken on a lot more responsibility for Little Fox and is looking out for her, and she's concerned for her welfare as well. There's even a moment where she stands up for Little Fox against one of the tougher looking members of that seafaring crew, and she rips off that lady's tentacle, where
Yeah.
it's like, you're a dirty human lover is what she calls Little Fox, and then it's like, Micah's just like, hey, back off, like that's like, say that again, kind of a situation. So she's actually standing up for her, and I think that comes from also this idea that Micah, from what we've seen, was basically abandoned, right? So it's like this idea that she doesn't know where her mother is, or like why she didn't um, tell her everything that Micah needed to know. Like, why are there so many mysteries? Like, why am I alone now? And like, why didn't you tell me anything? Why can't I find out anything? What are all these mysteries? What is the everything just get more and more complicated? And I think it's interesting to see how loyal she's been to Little Fox throughout this adventure.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of what Micah sees in Little Fox is not just obviously some of herself
Mm-hmm.
in what we've been talking about, or at least herself before she was corrupted, because you do get these moments where she's talking to we'll have to figure out how to say the guy's name, the tiger guy, Sizi or Seizi. It's we'll just have to sell one.
Yeah.
Seizi, Seizi, shall we?
Says he? Yeah, I don't know.
Sezi, whatever you want, Charles. I'm having some trouble. So Sezi basically has this interaction with Micah where he's like, last time I saw you is like you were a kid, you were dancing, and obviously Micah had some innocence to her at one point and still has a sensitive side, like when she's hugging, what do we say, Sizey?
Yeah.
Uh, Sizey.
Says he, sure.
She like tears up and she says to him, well, that's why I'm here, to be me again, to feel like a person, to remember what it is to dance. But for that to happen, I need to know. And it's interesting to watch Micah like figure out these sides of herself, like trying to be a person and needing these answers, but also seeing how she looks at Lil Fox as someone who still has a chance to never forget how to dance.
Right. And
Someone
that's an
who,
interesting
yeah,
scene that you bring up as well, because there's also this theme of kind of like redemption where Micah, there's this moment where Micah and Sezi are talking, and Sezi's like, I haven't seen you in so long, and she's like, I missed you too. I just didn't think I could stay. I I wasn't the same after the war, and I'm now the same. I'm not the same, and I'm unsafe. And then says he's like, everything I have come from years of ruthless murder, and am I safe? No, but I love, I am loyal, and that is my redemption. So this idea of like, it's like, hey, like I did some horrible stuff too. We all have. This is a violent world. We're all violent people, but I'm trying to make up for it, and my redemption is just loving in others, and I consider you part of my family. And I think that's another reason why Micah, we talked about how Little Fox was kind of like this symbol of hope in volume 1, and that
yeah,
definitely continues into this. And I think the idea of like Little Fox could be her redemption of, I can travel with Little Fox and keep her as like and love her basically as like a member of my family, and that love that I am struggling with from my relationship with my own mother. So it all piles on, and it's all very complex, but that's what makes it such a in-depth read. There's a lot to kind of sift through with this relationship.
for sure. And what's really intriguing is the way that Little Fox never seems to lose faith in Micah,
Yes.
where no matter what she sees from Micah, she still believes in her. And it's not like she hasn't witnessed it and she's just naive to it. She's just a person who has hope and can see the things that Micah does that are
Yeah. And
good.
she loves
So,
Micah. There's that scene
yes.
where they're sleeping on the ship, and they're under threat, and the monster wakes up, and this is where like the monster's tentacles are dragging Micah's body through the ship, hungry to eat some of the crew members. And Micah literally, I mean, Little Fox literally walks in between these sleeping sailors and the monster, being like, Miss, no, you can't feed on the sailors. You just can't. She's got her arms
Yeah.
out, being as brave as she can be, even though nothing she could do to stop them. But she tries anyway, and that's when Micah jumps off the ship, which is another really interesting moment. But it's, Micah's also, she's not just this innocent child that Micah's responsible for. Little Fox is trying to help Micah in the way that she can,
Yeah.
and she's growing and developing as a character as well, finding her strength. And this is just, she's gotten used to it by now, so she's not afraid to jump in front of the monster and try and coach Micah back to her, I guess you would say, her humanity. But
Well, yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, because
it's
she's
not
not
human.
human.
Yeah.
That's what got that's gotten people in trouble before, calling her human. You don't want to
Yeah.
end up with one of your tentacles ripped off,
No, I do
Charles.
not.
So, and in that moment, what's interesting is you have Lil Fox gets covered in blood when Micah rips that tentacle off of the dude, and she has this moment where the captain comes down and is like, "Oh, did you get your blood in your eyes?" Uh, and you have this little depiction of Lil Fox wiping at her face. And the way I love the way Lil Fox is drawn, like so much,
Oh
just
yeah,
like more rounded
yeah, she's
and
so cute.
cherubic almost, where all the other characters, or most of the other characters, are very angular, lots of hard lines. And yeah, there's this moment where Lil Fox is basically still covered in blood from Micah having ripped the tentacle off and says, "But I believe in Miss Micah." And you get some interesting dialogue too, where the captain says, when she's angry, "Do you think you even exist?" And even says, "That's not the problem. The problem is that she doesn't believe in you." So she's
Yes,
being exposed to these opportunities to say, "Oh no, you're right. Micah's wrong. I'm literally covered in blood." But she chooses to believe in Micah because she's able to see the side of Micah that did that because she cares about Lil Fox. And the moment she lost it was when the tentacle dude said something to Little Fox, not when she was being insulted and even slapped. So Micah herself, that is. So it's very interesting to watch Little Fox, and especially as someone who doesn't have the same kind of power as Micah, like not the same strength, still try to take on that heroic role and even like attacking Rohar at the end and
right.
all that. So
Yeah, they even get into like philosophical debates every once in a while, and um, it all comes back around to like being a good person versus fighting these horrible
yeah,
urges. That's kind of what they constantly go back and forth about. And there's one point where Little Fox is like, living isn't supposed to be easy. If it was easy, it wouldn't be called life, so say the poets. And then, and you're fighting to be better, miss. You just threw yourself off the ship to keep the monsters from hurting anyone. So she says, no, miss, you're not awful.
yeah,
So she's like, you're not awful, and you're trying to do better. And that goes back to what Sezi said of like, I love, and that's my redemption. It's like the pursuit of being good is kind of is is making you a good person, and Micah doesn't feel like a good person because she has to keep throwing herself off of ships and eating sirens to avoid killing
yeah.
other people, so it's like, but you're trying to do good. Well, it's hard to feel good when you still have to eat people, but it is what it is. And I think that whole idea of the pursuit of being better, that redemption, is the overwhelming theme of this volume.
For sure. And we did talk about in our last episode that Lil Fox is basically the angel on Micah's shoulder, and she doesn't need a devil because she has a monster coming out of the other shoulder,
Right.
so
Yeah.
that does the job.
That'll do it.
And yeah, so like you said, Charles, these moments where she does fling herself off the ship, yeah, maybe she ends up eating or Zin, the monster, anyway, ends up eating a siren, and that's not ideal,
Mm-hmm.
but the effort to try to be a good person, to listen to Little Fox, there's redemption in that
Because
in
it was,
itself.
she was going to eat a crew, like the monster
Yeah.
was going to eat a crew member, and Little Fox got in the way. And in that moment of struggle, Micah was the one that threw themselves over the edge of the ship. So
Yes.
it was that deliberate struggle to avoid eating any one of the crew that was her kind of pursuit to be better, her attempt at redemption. And she ended up eating someone a little less sympathetic, but still you're eating someone, so there's a little give or take there. But um, it's holding you over for now. It was enough to make Little Fox continue to believe in her, which at this point I think she's very committed to Micah, and I don't see that wavering anytime soon.
Definitely not. And we're circling around these points. I wrote in the discussion Micah, the monster, and morality as something
Mm.
I wanted us to talk about.
Mm.
And I think we're already circling around those. It is interesting to think about, like, it's hard to know the extent to which a siren is just as bad as killing one of the crew
Yeah.
members or
Right.
not, right? Because it just kind of comes out of nowhere. We know that they're probably related in some way, these folks, to the Blood Queen. But they seem pretty humanoid as much as anyone. So, but it's the effort. It's a thought that counts, and Micah seems to be making the effort even when she denies it. She basically claims she just tried to drown herself.
Right. Yeah. And that's been a struggle that she's had this whole series so far. Where the monster just has to feed, and it wants to eat all these innocent people in Micah's life. And Micah even has gone as far as to like consume pieces of her own body to keep the monster satiated. So it's
Yeah.
been a constant struggle uh, for her, and it's almost like a ticking time bomb because now she's like completely out of arm. She's doesn't have much spare skin to spare at this point, so she's desperately looking for answers, and that's definitely been the driving force into figuring out some of these mysteries and why we're setting sail right now in the first place.
For sure. And we know there's a lot riding on Micah being able to figure all of this out. We've gotten a lot more information, especially at the end of the graph of this volume.
Yes.
We got a lot more information. Some would say we even drowned in information and might die of wisdom anyway, as the poets might say. So we we learned that to some extent, Micah has a very big role to play as someone who holds the Shaman Empress's blood in her, and the fate of the world might rest on her shoulders, and we need to, or not we, uh, the crew over there needs to keep Micah on the right path if things are gonna go okay, is some of the sense that we're getting. The whole world could be in danger if Micah goes awry.
That's right. She could absolutely go wild, but then that's the whole thing, and she doesn't know, and all she knows is that there needs to be some uh, hope for her out there. And we talked about her relationship with her mom and how this brilliantly pairs with that. She doesn't even know what she's supposed to be. Some say she's the she's like the end of the world. Some say she's like the savior. Some don't know what's going on, but there's definitely a lot of shrouded mystery and mythical powers going on with her existence, and everyone kind of has a plan for her, and we see more of her kind of extended family and their plans for her, and the plot thickens. Essentially, you learn the motives of some other characters on the map here, but even beyond that, even just internally, I'm constantly drawn back to Micah's like trying to figure out, okay, I know what all these people want from me, and I know I've got this monster inside me, but have I even had the time to consider who I am? And all of her memories are no help either. Like when she has that flashback with her mom, when the mom is using the scarf on her, she has this brilliant line. It's like, "Who are you to me, really?" This is Micah talking about the mom. "And who am I? If not even you loved me, if I was just part of a plan, a vision, an outcome that you manipulated into existence." So that's a really great line that brings into mind of like, was I ever loved, or am I some tool? And what tool am I? What purpose am I supposed to serve? So not only does she not know who she is as an individual, she doesn't know what the mystery behind all of her, I guess for lack of a better word, powers are. And what people want from her, what she's expected to do with those powers.
Well said, Charles. And it's interesting to think about some of those reflections from Micah in light of the last flashback that we get, where her mother says to her, "No matter what happens, you belong to no one, you will be controlled by no one. Swear it to me, Micah. I will kill anyone who tells you otherwise." And Micah says, "You control me, though. I'm yours." And her mom says back to her, "I gave up that dream a long time ago."
Hmm.
And it's the kind of thing where, yeah, we learn from Rohar that it seems like Micah's mom basically went out to create Micah as some sort of tool to be wielded because of the power that she could have. But then we get this hint that maybe once Micah was a living, breathing person, maybe some of that started to go by the wayside, and her mother was able to see Micah for what she was instead of just being a tool. But there's a lot left for us to find out here.
Right. Identity is a huge part of the last chapter in this volume. It's like the last, beyond like redemption or her relationship with her mother. This idea of identity plays a huge theme in that ending section, and it all comes to a head with the mother of like, oh, I stopped trying to control you a long time ago. You need to be your own person. Like, that's the most important thing that no one can take away from you. Well, how can you say that to someone that has no idea who they are? It's like, okay, well, no one can take away from me the one thing I don't know about myself, which is who am I, and how in when you throw in all these like living gods into the mix, it becomes quite complicated.
For sure, Charles, and that's well said. When that's the major conflict is around Micah trying to understand her identity and her place and everything, it makes us buy into the way that the story is kind of all about her seeking out those answers.
Right.
So we we got some answers for sure, and some big ones that say like her mom saying to her what basically what the world becomes will depend entirely on the strength of your heart. So we know that Micah's attempts to figure out who she is and her identity are going to have these drastic consequences in the long run, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Yes, it ends very ominous, but still slightly hopeful. I'm also interested in how this idea of like figuring yourself out. Like, there's even another layer to it of she's trying to figure out why does she do these things. There towards the end she's debating like, why am I even in this boat right now, like on this island, like what is the driving force that's bringing me here. She says, mother, why did I follow you to this place? Sometimes I do things for you, and later it is as if I woke from a dream. Pleasing you doesn't always seem worth the price of staying alive, but every time I am near death I hear your commands and I fight because you taught me to fear your disapproval more than I fear death. So she's and that moment she's saving a drowning little fox also, but she like lets her swim a little bit and struggle while she's thinking it over, and then in those last moments of like, I guess I should thank you, is when she hauls little fox into the boat. And so it's interesting to see how she's like debating, why am I even here? Am I just kind of a piece, like doing a mission that my mother predestined me to do? Or is this something I actually want to do? Is it something I have to do because people are after me, or because a God's going to have me eat everyone I love? So there's that other level of self-discovery there, not only of who am I, but why am I doing this? It's very complicated for poor Micah.
Yeah, and that's an interesting read on this on the scene with Lil Fox. I did take it as Lil Fox. Yeah, maybe if she was left by herself, she would have drowned. But she did figure out how to swim in time to make her way over to the paddle.
Right.
Anyway, and I think that whole scene is very interesting from that perspective of the parallels between Micah and Lil Fox's relationship and Micah's relationship with her mother, because she's kind of at the same time having these reflections of how her mother, it's like, what does a wolf teach her pups but teeth and hunger, is what's going on in Micah's head. And at the same time she's giving her jacket over to Little Fox, who's cold from being in the water. So it's like, at the same time as thinking like, you've turned me into this just awful thing with nothing to offer, she's engaging in this kind gesture. And that's part of, I think this is what I love so much about Monstress, is how it toes that line.
And to bring up the artist again, Sana Takeda,
Yeah.
we get a very rare Micah smile. It's kind of a smile in that moment where she's like, when she's talking about Little Fox, because, the cat wants to jump into the water and save Little Fox, but then Micah grabs the cat
Yeah.
by the tails and is like, wait, she can swim now. And when Micah says she can swim now, she has this like unpracticed smile, I guess is how I would describe it, where it's
Well
like
phrased.
it's the happiest we've ever seen her, but it's not like something that she's used to expressing. She's got this like weird smile, and it's just like a brilliant artistic choice, and it's something that's very, very rare. And it's while she's musing on how strict her mother was, but she's like, I'm seeing some of the purpose of that, but I'm also doing my own thing by, not being not letting her swim all the way. I help her out a little bit, and that makes me happy, and that's who I am. And that's a very like a lighting moment into like hopefully how this story resolves. There is some hope for Micah in terms of her redemption.
Yeah, well, that's such a huge distinction that you bring up, Charles, and something I was noting as well is Micah never takes that extra step that her mother took, where I do. It's hard to imagine Micah actually hurting Little Fox with the way that she treats her. She's willing to test her a little bit psychologically, but the level of abuse has not been reached, and in some ways that's part of what makes us have hope in Micah here is, well, she's learned what she can from her mother, not to pamper per se. So let people forge their own path and have some challenges, but that doesn't mean you have to hit them or let them go cold after they're in the water. and Charles, can I give a shout out? I'm sure you have something interesting
to
say in response to that, but I do want to give a shout out just to how adorable the moment is.
Yeah.
Before the first time Lil Fox is swimming, it's on page 19 of my volume. I think.
God, mine just has
no,
continuous
that's
numbers.
wrong. Well, I got it wrong anyway, but it's when she's like, "Did you see me drowning?" Those moments, and you see her trying to swim the first time. She's such a interesting character. I don't really know any others like her. And on 19 was another adorable moment where she's trying to fight against Master Ren, that's a cat, being taken for some probably rough questioning. And you have the pirate guy holding Little Fox back, but he's holding her back just by like pinching her clothes at the shoulder. The little scene I'm talking about there. It's so, and she's like struggling, but he's so big that
there's
you
so
can tell
many
she can't get anywhere.
Awesome illustrations, and that scene where she's saved by that shark creature, and that shark creature is so intense looking and like mean looking, but she's like riding on her back and is like, "Thanks for saving me. Sorry I couldn't, swim the rest of the way." And then the monster's like, "No problem." It's like a very, very wholesome moments. Yeah, those illustrations of Little Fox and also the cat whose name I keep forgetting. The both of
Master
them,
Ren.
Master Ren. The both of them are very cute together. They'll often like be sleeping together, and Little Fox is always cuddling something, but she's not cuddling things as much in this volume as she was in volume 1, if you notice her.
I do notice. She does have that sort of self-soothing.
Yeah, she's always like hugging her own tail. Yeah.
Hugging her own tail, which is a great touch, but I do think that's intentional, like you're pointing out, Charles, where maybe she's getting a little more used to being involved in all of this. So during the really tough times, she's back hugging the tail, but it is less than the first volume for sure.
Yes, indeed. And it's that kind of subtle character growth through just the illustrations even that's makes this series so good.
For sure. And something that this comic medium offers that would be a bit harder, and we're used to reading these giant fantasy novels, but if you start throwing in too much of a tick for a character, we know that Robert Jordan takes some heat for all the tugging on braids
Yeah.
going on in the Wheel of Time. And there's something that just works easier in a comic about, like, oh, it's interesting that they depict Lil Fox as having this tendency to hug her tail when she's scared,
Right.
and that tends to work better than just seeing the line of
Yeah,
of
because if we
prose
had to
all the
read the
time of
phrase
like
like, "Well,
she
little fox
hugged her
grabs her tail,"
tail.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it would start to be like, "Okay, we get it. Like, let's move
right.
on." Yeah, and I mean, could you imagine trying to describe some of this stuff that's going on in
Oh,
this? Also, it's so much detail in these illustrations. You'd spend 100 pages just describing what the setting that you're in.
oh yeah. I mean, especially those scenes on the island are there's so much going on in those.
Yep, and the scenes
And
with the gods talking to each other, like that sense of
oh yeah.
scale, super interesting. How these
Well,
monsters just kind of loom over each other and how they work within the frames.
well, Charles, that's something I did want to bring up. I mentioned uh, Micah, the monster, and morality, and we've talked a lot about Micah and morality, but we haven't talked very much about the monster and morality, which is
Yeah,
that Zin, in the first volume, the monster's in, or old god, or whatever you want to call him, I don't know.
it.
They, it does it, either way, Zin ends up seeming in that first volume kind of just like this hungry demon that wants to feed on
Yeah,
living things. And because Monstress has so much depth, even Zin has some moral quandaries to work out here. We don't get a ton of it in Volume 2, but we do get hints that he's like, wow, I betrayed one of my own kind. That's really messed up. And it's oh, such a great job by the author to make it that even Zin has a moral code
yeah.
that they're trying to grapple with.
Yeah, there's that moment where Zin is bleeding. He's like, "My blood is real, and I've never known the color of my blood, but it's fitting. I have been delivered to the site of my transgression. How can I not pay in flesh and pain?" That's something that Zin is musing on as they're in like the like most dramatic part of this battle here with that Fox character, and he's like lamenting on like he
Yeah.
like uncovered through his memories that he was so like kind of vengeful and powerful and not sympathetic to the weak or whatever. He wanted to stay on this planet and he didn't care about
Mhm.
the lives that were already there. And he's like, no. And if you disagree with me, then I'm gonna, fellow God, then I'm gonna kill you. And now he's like
Yeah.
realizing he did that. I was like, and he's like, whoa, that's horrible. I can't believe I did that. My transgression.
Did not think we'd get when I was reading volume 1 for the first time. I did not think that the monster would ever feel guilty about
Yes,
transgressions.
and
But
then we talk about this idea of identity, and he goes, or it goes, "What have I done? What was I? Who am I? Perhaps it is truly time for me to die. I deserve it." So, and that's right, at the end of this volume. And this is something we did not, this trope of that hungry monster that feeds, like you well
yeah.
stated. And now this monster has a surprising amount of depth to it, and it's we're seeing these themes paralleled between Micah and the monster. They're in the same host right now, and the monster's like, "What was I? Who am I?" Those are questions that I believe Micah is probably asking herself as well. Of like, what is happening? Who am I? And am I capable of loving again? Which was another surprising piece to the end of this volume.
Yeah. Well, the parallel process that we're getting for Micah and the monster, it's really interesting because they basically can see each other's flashbacks,
Yes.
and that's a very interesting plot device, I think, where they're learning about each other, and because they have to coexist, they also are getting more ammunition on how to manipulate the other one. So you see Micah starting at the end, even where the Zin's back out and eating all those people on the boat, and Micah not happy about that situation, and she starts throwing out lines like, uh, "Is that why you murdered your friend?"
Yeah.
So yeah, that's so intriguing
And it
to
gives
this
more
volume.
characterization to what we just considered the monster. Like the monster has a lot of emotion going on and a lot of conflict going on, and was in like a relationship and is having regrets and is having an identity crisis. Like, it's
Yeah,
all going on.
yeah. So the characters in here, none of them skate by without having to deal with the consequences of their own actions and grapple with their own morality, and that's
And
part
it's
of
also kind
what's
of interesting when you consider this setting, right? It's the bones of the god that this
yeah,
monster killed. So it's kind of a way of like facing your demons, which is what they're both doing, right? The monster's facing the demon of his transgression, right? Killing his what it called a sister brother. Go figure. And then Micah is following the footsteps of her mother, and they're both going through these flashbacks at the same time and having these identity crises at the same time, and they're trying to work together, and it culminates with them being able to fight in tandem to kill this horrible monster creature. So this idea of the
right.
setting plays a really interesting parallel, and this idea of facing their demons or something like that. They're walking in their
Well,
shadows of their past.
yeah, to flesh that out even more, Charles, you made awesome points about that. Is you get the sense that Rohar by the end is some sort of amalgamation of the Fox Ancient he was and something that's coming off of this corpse of
Mm.
the old god that has turned into this monstrosity. And you basically, Rohar is the person who sent Micah's mother out on the maybe that's not the right way to phrase it, but set her out on the path or gave her the information she needed to go out on a path that resulted in Micah being born.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the same creature that has that entity inside of it has the creature that Zin betrayed inside of it. So it's like Rohan monster
Right.
thing is both of those demons of their past
Personified.
combined,
Yeah.
and then yeah, and then Micah and the monster have to fight them together. So it's such an interesting way to go about this, and all that subtext that there's no turn to the non-existent camera moment where they say, wow, it's like we're both fighting the demons of our
Yeah.
past, but it's happening, and the way it's done is so interesting. So even just to the point where the other old god that Zin killed has the red text in the graphic novel,
Right.
and the red bubbles, I guess I should say, not
Yeah.
the
Yeah. It's
text
white
itself.
text with in a red bubble. It's white knockout
Yes.
text.
Yeah, and then that becomes the outline, not the whole bubble, but the
Right.
outline of the
Yes.
bubble that Rohan is talking with when Rohan becomes this
Yes, and it's
sort
that
of amalgamation
tan
thing.
color
And
that is the
yes,
one that is used for Micah's like narrating voice. That's an interesting observation that I didn't pick up on, but it's totally there. Another great moment
yes,
is Micah's about to kill Rohan, and Rohan's like, I can tell you where the rest of the mask is and the name of your father, and then she's thinking about her mom at this moment. Micah is, and she's like, "You're gone, and I'm here paying the price for your choices. I'll never stop paying." And those two things are happening at the same time. And then Micah's just like, "You've told me enough. It was a mistake to come here," and breaks the chain, kills the monster, all in like, and then the tentacles finish it off. It's like this very like all of
yeah.
those things come together at the same moment. And that's basically how this volume ends. There's a few teaser things, cliffhangery things after this, but that's kind of the climactic moment of the arc of this volume of being like breaking the chains, kind of a thing of like,
Oh
I should have
yeah,
never come here. I don't care who am I about any of these father mysteries. Like, you've told me enough, and I'm moving on.
Right, and the subtlety and depth with which it's told is something I've always been impressed by. And it's part of why I think, since I'm rereading now, there's still so much value to be gotten by it, because things like the parallel between the scarf moment and the chain moment and the chain actually being broken, those are things you could easily miss while reading this if you're kind of cruising through it, right? There's just one small panel where you see that the chain is now broken.
Right.
So if you weren't kind of noting that or skipped over it.
Yeah, and it's not like the panel is focusing in on that chain either. There's so much detail going on and so many other things happening. It's a really small surface area of the page, So yeah, it's told very restrained, and it's with a lot of subtext, and it's what really makes it a rewarding read, especially for like a graphic novel or like, something that you're used to reading, like superhero comics. It's like the same medium. It's hard to believe.
Yeah, and it's so poetic to see it when it's done like that. Because I get on the moments where the characters seem to almost turn to the audience and tell them what's happening. I love when the artist and the illustrator and the author give us the opportunity to figure it out for ourselves instead of having
and
that
to
moment.
figure that out by
The prophecy. It said, Charles, that that she would break the chain. I said that earlier, remember, audience?
Yeah. It's like it flashbacks, like you will break the chains.
Yes.
Music swelling. We did not get that.
No, and we're better off for it. So
definitely.
Yeah. Well, Charles, there's pretty much just that teaser at the end, then that we see some guy with the mark, and we did in the darkness, but we do get to see the mark. And we had Rohan say, "Oh, I can tell you about your father." So I don't know.
Yeah,
we'll have to see where that ends up
It's a
going.
unique mark. It's a mark that can only be given to someone that bears the god or something like that. So it
bears the blood of the shaman empress.
Yes, the blood of the shaman empress. And we also see all these severed fingers and an eyeball here. Very ominous lighting. Talking about the mask, and so there's another child in the room. So yes, very, very ominous. More questions asked, but that's what leaves us dangling, wanting more as we enter Volume 3, and I'm very excited to see where it goes. I mean, this series so far has been so just jam-packed with depth and in its settings and its characters and its themes and its world building. It's like there's so much to just think over and digest here, and we're only getting more questions. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens to Micah on her adventures.
So am I, Charles, and I'm looking forward to having more awesome conversations about it with you.
That's right.
Nailed it.
And if you were looking for a place to have those conversations, well, I have a few places you might want to try. The first being Twitter, and that's at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. We also have Facebook and Instagram if you prefer those. You want to see what we're doing over there. And our handle on both of those is at the FTF Podcast. If you want to send us an email, well, we got one of those too, and that's the FTF Podcast at gmail.com. Hit us up over there. Now, Dylan, if someone just so happens to be listening on Apple Podcasts and they want to show some love for the show, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. If you go to our podcast page and you scroll down past all those episodes we know you've been listening to, then you'll find the part where it says ratings and reviews, and click those stars. 5 of them would be ideal, and write a review if you do have the time. But if we don't, we know you're busy. Just throw 5 of those stars and, just get to the end of this episode, Charles. That's what counts. Our listeners, we appreciate it.
Listeners, thank you so much for making it to the end of the episode. That alone, such a huge deal. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.